Greetings and warm welcome to everyone who participates in this process of developing a culture of thinking spiritually on the human condition and the realities of our times. The focus of our thinking today is, if I may choose a title for this, the duty to live significantly. The duty to live significantly. When I read the teachings of Jesus Christ, I not only read the teachings of Jesus Christ, I also try and listen to it in the impregnable silence of my inner life. It is in order to afford myself this experience that I have learned quite a bit of Jesus' teachings by heart. And I commend this exercise to especially young people, and this video is particularly addressed to the youth all over the world. I commend to you the discipline of learning at least some of the teachings of Jesus Christ by heart, so that when you are alone, you can hear the words of Jesus within yourself, which is very different from the experience of reading the printed text. I say this because of my personal experience, and I found this to be very stimulating, very rewarding, very enriching, and very fortifying, very strengthening, inwardly strengthening. Now, when I listen to the words of Jesus as they are spoken within myself, the one truth that emerges very brightly and very cheerfully and very encouragingly is that the whole of Jesus' teaching is a clear invitation to live significantly. And this is something I want to commend to my young friends who would be listening to me. Live your life significantly. Life is the ultimate value. There is nothing more precious, more important, more significant than life. And therefore, the quintessential spiritual duty is to live our life significantly. Now, in contrast to this, the goal that is widespread among all sections of people of all ages, and particularly young people in our times, is that life is to be enjoyed, have a good time. And we have our own notions about what constitutes good life. I don't want to go into the details of this because that would be repeating the familiar. So I want to strike a contrast between living significantly and living in ease and comfort, or living according to the pleasure principle. So this is the theme, and I would like this to be fixed very clearly in our mind. Now, how do we actually choose between the two? We know that in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus deals with this issue in a very, very memorable fashion. You find that in the 7th chapter of Matthew's Gospel, verses 13 and 14. If you would kindly read these two verses, where Jesus talks about two ways, the narrow way as well as the broad way. He says, very few people choose the narrow way, whereas the vast majority of people take the broad way that leads to everlasting damnation. It's a narrow way that leads to life. So this distinction is very clear in the teachings of Jesus Christ. How do we choose between the two? That's the issue. It would make great sense at the given point in time, depending on our disposition or outlook, how we are inclined, to choose the broad path. After all, why shouldn't you travel in comfort? Why shouldn't you be a traveler through life in all its comfort, its abundance, its riches, etc., and have a trouble-free time? In preference to this, what is it that can possibly make you or motivate you to choose the narrow way? And that's something we need to understand. Now, in order to understand this in a particular light, let me make a reference to an image from an author whom I used to like a great deal, who was an influence on me when I was growing up, Soren Kierkegaard. He says, look, most people in the world are like the dry leaves that are blown away by the wind into the deep forest and are not known or seen thereafter. How come that people become like dry leaves? He says, because that's how people choose to live. If you live a futile, meaningless, fruitless life, it's necessary, it's inevitable that you wither away, you dry up before your time, and then you fall, and there is no relevance to your life. Nobody has any value for you, and when you are tucked away into your grave, people would say silently, if not loudly, well, good riddance. You know, I have heard this said about people in context of their burial, good riddance. Well, this may not be said as such about many people, but the reality is not very far from it. And I sincerely wish that this would not be the case with any one of you. And that's the reason why I'm sharing these thoughts, and therefore I'm sure these thoughts would be of interest to you. Now, this very morning I was reading a small book by a French author who lived about 150 years ago. His name is Ernest Renin. I don't know if you are familiar with the name of Ernest Renin. He has a wonderful book on the life of Jesus Christ. He has another book on the history of early Christianity. He has another very stimulating book titled The Future of the Future of Science. He has a book on a perspective on Islam, and so on and so forth. He was a very prolific author, a very deep thinker, a great scholar, certainly a great scholar. So the life of such people interests me. For example, the life of Victor Hugo, the life of Alexis de Tocqueville, the life of Goethe, the correct German pronunciation is Goethe, the great German author, philosopher, poet, etc. The life of Tolstoy, the life of, in more recent times, Bertrand Russell. All these people have written their biographical stuff, and that's why I'm making a reference to them. Now, interestingly, Goethe titled his memoir Truth and Beauty. That's the title he chose, Truth and Beauty. So when he thinks about his life, the two attributes that come uppermost in his mind, and this is something that challenges me. It makes me so happy. I cannot conceal my excitement, the very beauty of it. Now, he says the two things that are foremost in his mind as he recollects his life is truth and beauty, life devoted to truth. I hope to do a video later on Bertrand Russell, how he recollects his life. He talks about the three important attributes of his life, but that's the substance for another video. I would earnestly commend this to my young people, my young friends. Please cultivate friendships with these great minds. Otherwise, you will be missing out on the very feast of life. So, why is it that these are the two important words, truth and beauty? Surely, that life is glorious, life is beautiful, and we have a duty to live life beautifully. And beauty is not a matter of mere outward appearance. Beauty is also a matter of depth. When I talk about a poem or a play or a novel as beautiful, my primary reference is to the depth, the grandeur of the imagination, the profundity of the total experience that is encapsulated in the form of this work of art. Our life needs to be made beautiful. When you think of the Garden of Eden, for example, why was it that God chose to place Adam and Eve in a garden? Surely not only to provide food for them. Food can be obtained even from the jungles. Garden is a metaphor both of bread and beauty. Surely we associate garden with beauty, isn't it? That should be the quality of our life. Again, this is not something, it's not a theme that I'm going to develop in detail at this point in time. Hopefully there will be occasions for this later. Now, one of my favorite English poets, John Milton, the greatest epic poet of the English language, perhaps the only genuine one. Spencer has a claim to it, but anyway, Fairy Queen. I'm sorry to burden you with these names, not because I was a teacher of English, but that it's important for us to know that we are living against a glorious backdrop of millennia of human beings dreaming of beauty and greatness. That substance of humanity is too glorious. And in our times, when everything is being cheapened and degraded, it's all the more important for us to remind ourselves that this is really the stuff to which we belong. That's the reason why I try and avoid these references as much as I can, as you have noticed. I try to exclude scholarship from these presentations because I don't want to burden my viewers. Yet, it's necessary for us to realize that there was a very different approach to life, there was a different perception of the quality of life, and there was a different stature of life that was lived at a certain point in time. Now, in this context, let me also make a reference to my own memoir titled On a Stormy Course. The title itself, it pertains to the events that comprised my tenure as the principal of St. Stephen's College. Widely agreed, I don't think anyone would debate this, widely agreed to be the most tempestuous tenure that any principal had in the history of higher education in this country. Why was it so? I can claim this with a sense of humility and gratitude to God that God gave me the wisdom in 2007 to choose to walk the narrow path. And therefore, from my experience, I can bear witness to the profound and undying relevance of the words of Jesus Christ. Choose the narrow way. Choose the narrow way. So, Jesus is very clear about this, and he was clear about it because he had made this choice right at the beginning. When he began his public ministry, as you know, he faced temptations. All those temptations, the essence of those temptations was the temptation to take to the broad way of life that everybody else would choose. So live like everybody else, which seems to be the choice that most people exercise today. So, from my experience, I want to tell my young friends that to choose the broad way, the beaten track, to do as everyone else does, while in Rome behave like Romans, to do the done thing, to conform to the dominant trend, to be fashionable, to imitate others, to consume public opinion, and to have no opinion on your own. This is very cheap, and it is doing great disservice to yourself. So when I look back on my own life, I can tell you and take it as a matter of my witness and my testimony. If I have a sense of fulfillment about my life, it's only this, that God gave me the grace to walk the narrow way. And that has impacted the formation of my personality, and therefore ultimately my theme in this unit is the mystery of personality formation, and I'm sure young people are keenly interested in this. So there are two approaches to life. One is to live safely, don't run any risks, and success is very attractive to us because the successful people are supposed to be safe people. The other approach is very different to this, and that is live significantly. Significance always involves adventure. Adventure involves risks. For example, young people, I'm sure this is close to your heart. You would like to drive through the road as if there is no tomorrow, right? Speed, thrills. Why? You know that speed kills, but it thrills. Why? Because you're craving for something out of the way, out of the ordinary. And yet, when it comes to the significant choices in life, you always choose, not everyone, but most people choose the beaten track. And that leads to utter disenchantment, frustration, and remorse. Fruitless, self-destructive, self-degrading remorse at the end. Now, In contrast to this, Jesus says the spiritual duty is to live life to the full. I mean, not as the world understands it. Jesus says, I have come that they may have life and life in all its fullness. What does it mean to have life in its fullness? Surely, an easygoing life is not life in its full, it's life in its superficial aspect. Do I have to tell you that is struggle and suffering? It is the willingness to enter into the adventure of life. It's a capacity to take leave of the comfort zones and enter into unknown, uncharted territories that enables you even to penetrate to the depth of your own being, leave alone to the depth of the larger, profound realities of life. Ultimately, the tragedy that most people live through and die of is that they do not know themselves. They die as strangers to themselves. So to put it differently, they die before they can begin to live. And it's in this light that we need to understand the relevance and the profundity of Jesus' teaching. I have come that they may have life and life in all its fullness. Now, let me very briefly flag what stands in the way of most people claiming this ultimate value of life in its fullness. It is that most people in this world take the broad way of imitating everybody else. Somehow we have been trained from birth onwards, and education plays a very destructive role. The religious formation also aggravates that problem. The training that we get all the time is conform to the existing trends, and particularly conform to the dominant trends. Don't deviate from the set path. That is to say, live your life as everybody else lives their life. At the same time, we're always told that you're unique, you have a unique personality, right? But live only as other people live. Why is it that people can't see this glaring contradiction? So the one thing that we cannot do if we are committed to life in its fullness is living life as everybody else does, or doing just the done thing, or walking the beaten track. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was very fond of that poem by the American poet Robert Frost, Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Evening. I shall be telling this with a sigh. Somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the less travelled by. I took the less travelled by, and that has made all the difference. That's it. The poet understands the truth of Jesus' teaching. I don't think Robert Frost would have written these lines if Jesus had not taught the same idea or introduced this idea through the Sermon on the Mount. Each one of us must realize that God has created us to be unique individuals. Now, for animals, this is not an issue. 100 buffaloes will resemble each other. They may eat the same thing, they may walk the same way, they may live exactly like all other buffaloes. But to be human is to be individually unique and specific. Let me illustrate that through a little bit of literature. Now, a flower. Take the word flower. There are thousands of flowers in the world, thousands of varieties. So when I use the word flower, it's a general thing. But suppose I write a poem about a rose. Then that particular rose, there are millions, there are billions of rose flowers in the world, but out of all that, that particular rose flower becomes a very special, unique thing. That is what I mean. Each one of us is like this rose flower that God as a poet discerns and admires. Otherwise, do you think God would have sacrificed His Son, Jesus Christ, that we may be redeemed from our state of degradation? Look at the incalculable worth that God ascribes to each one of us. It's very much like the poet harboring that beautiful flower in his soul so that he may write a poem about it. We are all these buds in the heart of God that we may blossom into fullness of life. I can't possibly put it any better than that. So, I believe that this is the meaning of being born again. When Jesus said to Nicodemus, "Truly, truly, I say to you, unless you are born again, you shall not enter the kingdom of God. You shall not see the kingdom of God." This is what he meant. You have to become that unique individual. The problem with Nicodemus, potentially he was a very good man. His heart was in the right place. Everything was good about him. He was respected in the society. He had all the credentials that must go with a religious leader of repute in those days. There's no question about it. It's never in doubt. And yet Jesus says you have to be born again. In what sense? Till then, till he encountered Jesus, Jesus the benchmark of being human, till he encountered Jesus, he was a cog in the machine. He was a fixture. He was an accessory of the religious system, and he had to sacrifice his individuality, his personality for it. In the 12th chapter of the letter to Romans, Paul, with great emphasis and great clarity, says, "Do not conform to the pattern of the world." What is the pattern of the world? Conformity. Blind, unthinking, habitual, animal-like conformity is the pattern of the world. And I'm reminded of an episode from a classroom. A mathematics teacher asked the class, there were 10 sheep on this side of the fence. One of them got to the other side of the fence through a hole in the fence. How many are left on this side? So there wasn't much of a response. So the teacher singled out a student called Johnny. He said, "Johnny, you get up and you give me the answer." Johnny scratched the back of his neck and said, "Teacher, I don't know much about maths, but I know something about sheep. If one sheep out of 20 passes through this hole from this side of the fence to the other side, all the other sheep too will follow. There will be none left on this side." That is how human beings behave. Unless and until we are born again, and we are born again into authentic personality, godly individuality, distinct individuality. That's the most precious thing. That's the greatest miracle in the world. It is this that young people need to keep as the point of reference. Now, briefly recall the 3 temptations that Jesus faced right at the beginning of his public ministry. The essence of those temptations was the compulsion or the temptation to conform to the pattern of the world, to do exactly as other people do, to think and act, to relate and respond, and to live for goals that are embraced by everybody else. So to reduce the individual to the common denominator of ordinary humanity. And if one allows oneself to be reduced in that manner, what happens? One fails to fulfill one's unique personal destiny. My only prayer is this: Lord, give me the strength and wisdom to understand and stay steadfastly faithful to my personal destiny, or that unique purpose with which you have placed me upon this earth, so that before I die, I become human. I know no other way to becoming human. I have to say this with all the emphasis I can muster. And I know no other way, no other formula for personality development. And in this context, let me make a reference to the historian that I'm very fond of, Arnold Toynbee, whose book, A Study of History in 6 volumes, is something that I recommend to everyone, especially those who have time and interest in reading. It took him about 25 years of painstaking research and disciplined writing to produce that magnum opus. Having completed that huge and gigantic task, unmatched by anybody else after his time, Arnold Toynbee, recollecting, reminiscing his journey, the journey of his life, he said, "I'm very grateful for the singular blessedness of having had a clear sense of purpose in my life." That is a strength I commend to young people, because you're living at a time when you're pulled apart in different ways. To quote a few words from the English poet of the 19th century, Matthew Arnold, our scattered aims and divided life. Our life is divided, our aims are scattered. Here we are as on a darkling plain where ignorant armies clash by night. We don't even know what we are fighting for. We are fighting. It's darkness everywhere. We don't understand everything clearly, yet we go through certain motions in life. How can you say that you are living? Here as on a darkling plain where ignorant armies clash by night. Life should be different from this. That's why Jesus says, I've come that they may have life and life in all its fullness. Now, let me close by saying this. I know, having interacted with thousands of young men and women in the context of higher education, I know that a majority of young men and women are bored to the marrow of their bones with religion. In my generation, we too were bored, but we didn't have the guts to say so. But fortunately, the young people in this generation are far more truthful than we have been in our times, and therefore they say to your face, look, we have had enough of this. Please, let's be. Spare us, right? So now, I want to tell you that this boredom that you experience is very positive. In fact, it's far more spiritual than the piety of my generation. You might be surprised that I say so. I say so with all sincerity because the boredom that you experience is a clear message to you. It's a wake-up call to you that this is not the way, that the real thing is somewhere else. That the sum total of all these religious observances, rituals and practices, conformity to various traditions and dogmas, it adds up to nothing. And your soul is starving in the process. This is not what you need. Or this is certainly not something that can meet the deepest longing in you. And the positive thing about it is that your soul is craving in order that the core of goodness in you may be fulfilled. But unfortunately, the context in which you are embedded does not give you, as of now, the conducive context for it. Therefore, I have to say now that one of the great adventurous things you have to do for yourself is to create that context. That context is not available ready-made to you. It was not available ready-made to any generation in the past, even 2000 years ago. You always find a tension between the society on the one hand, the religious community on the other, bracket them together, and then the individual on the other. The society and religious community in one bracket, the individual, the sensitive, godly, truth-seeking, justice-seeking or justice upholding individual on the other. There was no context in which the two harmonized. So individuals who were godly, individuals imbued with a spiritual vision and a sense of a godly mission in life, they had to create that context. And that creating that context is not a small adventure. It's not like eating breakfast. It is really a very, very exciting task, but it's a doable thing. And surely we may have to suffer in the process. In fact, I have to say we have to suffer in the process, but I tell you, that suffering is redemptive. That suffering is like the fire that burns away the dross in you, and it makes your personality shine forth like gold purified 7 times. That to me is the most powerful personality building principle I can share with you. Live your life significantly. Avoid the temptation to stay stuck in your comfort zones. Your comfort zones soon enough will become your sepulchres. It's a principle of death. God has designed us to be dynamic. Momentum is the essence of life, as is clearly intuited in the first book of the Bible, when Genesis chapter 2, God shaped Adam out of the mud of the earth and breathed into him. Breath is a dynamic principle. You don't have frozen death. You don't have a frozen breath. You don't have breath that sleeps. No, it goes on dynamic. So the very essence of life is this dynamism, momentum. Do not vegetate, do not stagnate. Conformity puts you on course to stagnation. It is death, it's a death principle. Avoid it. God is faithful to guide you through the adventure of life. Live your life significantly, Who is my role model for it? The Lord Jesus Christ, the Galilean, the light of the world. And when he died on the cross, the Roman centurion said, truly, this man was the Son of God. Live life significantly. Thank you.